Good evening and welcome to another edition of Let's Get Down to Business. On this evening's program, I have a very special guest. He's the Honorable Camillo Gonsalves, Minister of Finance, Economic Planning, and Information Technology. You'll meet him when we come back from the break.
Isn't it good to know that no matter where you are, you're covered? Covered by a company owned by Vaccination that understands your unique insurance needs. At Metrocint General Insurance Company, we've invested 50 years of service to guarantee that you have the peace of mind that you deserve. When it comes to motor vehicle, property, employer's liability, business insurance, and much more, we've got you covered. Our professional and friendly staff understands your needs and ensures you understand your options. Metrocint General Insurance Company.
Keep calm. We're online now. Thousands of local content for your viewing pleasure. Live. Boom. IKTV. Tune in. Get interactive. Get involved with WhatsApp or Instagram. Interact live. Party from home. Subscribe, follow, send us your voice notes. Check us out on Instagram, Facebook, WhatsApp, or call us live in studio. Be where the world is going. Stay home and connect online. Boom 1069, IKTV. Join the evolution. It's all about you. Connect now.
You're looking at Let's Get Down to Business. Let's Get Down to Business is a collaboration between the Chamber of Industry and Commerce and IKTV. On this edition, I have with me the Honorable Camillo Gonsalves. Minister, welcome.
Great to be here, Tony.
Yes, it's always a pleasure to be talking to decision makers, policy makers, and I'm sure the audience is waiting with bated breath to hear what you have to say. I think I want to start out by looking at some economic indicators. I know you are not very big on those, traditionally speaking, or the traditional way of reporting economic performance. But that's for a different conversation.
Sure.
Because I was referring there to the book that you wrote.
Yes.
And but I want us to have that in a different conversation.
Glad you read it, Tony. So in as much as you read it, that's an endorsement for me.
I may only read that chapter. But tell me, we all know the economic challenges or what's driving the economic challenges, and I will give you an opportunity to remind people what they are. And I want you to tell me actual figures in terms of your revenues, your debt servicing, and you managing those through these challenging times. Let's look at also your last quarter performance and what's the outlook for third quarter.
Okay. Well, as we all know, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, indeed the world, has been locked in an economic downturn related to COVID. And before we had all of our additional challenges, we were struggling with the economic fallout of COVID. Last year in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, the economy contracted by about 5%, which, while it was a severe contraction, we don't have any contractions on recent record of that size, it was certainly a smaller contraction than other islands in the neighborhood experienced. And there are a number of reasons for that. The primary reason is that we're less tourism dependent than those other countries. But additionally, we never locked down to the extent that other countries did. So our hit was not as large. And we were fortuitous in the timing of COVID, in that COVID in this first year in March struck us after the Vaccination tourism high season. And our tourism product is very cyclical. So the 5% contraction was was severe, but relatively speaking, not bad. We were hoping at the beginning of this year that we would be emerging from contraction and having some modest growth this year. But then we had the challenge of the volcano, which was devastating. And the impacts of that continue to be felt. I'm sure we'll have an opportunity to discuss the fallout from the volcano over the course of this program. But the eventuality of the volcano threw some of our projections into a tailspin. We certainly didn't have models to plan for the impact of the volcano. And then we've had a few other hits. We had a glancing blow from a hurricane, which also caused some fallout as well. And COVID, of course, has intensified in not only in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, but in the region. And what affects a country in the region has knock-on effects on St. Vincent and the Grenadines. So we had a number of challenges. Now, how has that manifested itself on the books? Through the end of August, revenue in St. Vincent and the Grenadines is actually up over last year. And taking that period through the end of August, revenue is up by about $72 million. So we're about $474 million in revenue through the end of August.
Are you saying $72 million more than you were August the same last year?
At the similar point last year. A lot of that is, well, there are two avenues where this additional $70-odd million comes from. One part of it is that because of the volcano, there were a few grants that we received in terms of assistance and aid in the wake of the volcano that bolstered the revenue and grants component of the budget. And the other very significant factor, representing about half of that $70-odd million, is that we've had an extremely busy year in property sales of high-value properties in the Grenadines.
So mainly Mustique, I imagine.
Primarily Mustique. So the revenue that we get from alien land holding licenses, because every time a foreigner buys a piece of property in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, they have to pay an alien land holding license, which is a percentage of the value of the property. And in stamp duty, which is a tax that everyone pays when property is bought or sold in St. Vincent.
So that's on the revenue side. Let's look at the expenditure side now. So you're up 72 million.
We're up 72, about half of that is Mustique sales, half of that is grants.
So what your expenditure?
And on just to finish the point, on the revenue side, the things that would reflect the economy in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, like VAT, how much money comes in at the port and so on, those numbers are flat. So the internal economy of St. Vincent and the Grenadines is fairly flat. And the boost we have in revenue is from external sources. On the expenditure side, we're spending a lot more money than we spent last year, particularly on the capital side. So our wage bill is flat. We're paying the same salaries that we paid the year before, more or less. But we've had so many additional challenges. We've had the challenges primarily of the volcano. We have to clear roads. We have to rebuild homes. We had to take care of a displaced population of over 20,000
So these are all unplanned expenses.
All these expenses
So I'm going to ask you, with the unplanned expenses, how has that, how has it affected your planned expenditure?
Yeah. So as I said, on the recurrent side, which is our wages and those sorts of things, we've held strain. Nothing much has changed. We haven't fired people. Nobody's been laid off as a result of the economic contraction and the difficulties that we've had. Nor have we done a tremendous amount of wage restraint through not hiring people or anything like that. That side of the equation has carried on fairly as normal as it can be in the circumstances. The challenges have been on planned expenditure, planned capital expenditure on developmental projects. A lot of those monies have had to be reassigned in the short term to other things. We hope, for example, to break ground on our new acute referral hospital this year.
This is in Annisville.
That at the Annis site of the Annisville tarmac. First of all, the tarmac was taken up by all of these relief tents. But secondly, we had to take that money and apportion it elsewhere to deal with some of the volcano relief and other relief work. There have been some major road work projects that we wanted to commence early in the year during the dry season. Both the timing caused by the volcano and the resources were affected, and we had to also realign that money. People don't realize that we have been, in addition to feeding over 5,000 people 3 meals a day in shelters and paying all of the ancillary costs there, we had been doing food support programs for the other 15,000 people who were otherwise displaced.
There's an impression out there that the monies that you've gotten for aid in response to the volcano mainly, that has taken care of itself, okay, and there's no further input required. You know, and in fact, I get the impression that some people even think that there's surplus.
Yes, yes.
You know, so I want you to address that. Give me some ideas of the quantities of monies that you've received.
Yeah, in terms of grant money, the money that we have received as grants, which is free money, it's not a loan or anything like that, has not been particularly large. I think that, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but so I'm going to give you ballpark numbers rather than precise numbers.
That's right.
We didn't receive more than about $12 to $14 million in grant money.
US or EC?
US dollars.
Yeah.
The additional money, we've either reapportioned loan money we had, or we've used money that we set aside in the case of a disaster, which we'd set aside previously, and I'll speak to that in a second, or entities that have given millions of dollars have not given it to the government. Right. They've given it to the Red Cross, to various NGOs, to the World Food Program and other things. And the government doesn't see any of that money. They participate in the assistance.
And it impacts the economic performance.
Clearly. But it is not money that the government has at its discretion to spend how we want. Right. Now, just to mention what we had done, we, as you know, set up something called a contingencies fund a couple of years ago. And we populated that fund through a 1%, 1 percentage point and a $3 per night room tax at hotels. At the time of COVID, when COVID first struck, that contingencies fund had gotten up to about $30 million EC. We spent some of that money in COVID to deal with the eventuality of COVID, and then spent additional money from that contingencies fund once the volcano hit. So part of the money that we have, we got from the contingencies fund. Additionally, when we negotiate our developmental loan package with the World Bank gives us an envelope and says you have this much money to spend on projects. And we told the World Bank a year ago that we wanted to set aside $20 million of that money, not to build a bridge or a road or a school, but in the event of a natural disaster. And it was fortuitous, or it represented at least some foresight, because events bore out the fact that that money was necessary. So we drew that money down. Now, that money from the World Bank is not a grant.
It's a soft loan.
It's a very soft loan, and we have the terms are very, very forgiving, but it's money we have to pay back, and it's a loan. So when people talk about all the grants that came in, sometimes they're talking about money that's either not a grant or money that we had already set aside in the event of a disaster.
And also they're referring to monies that have gone, as you said, channeled through
other sources.
Other sources.
But the loss and damage for the volcanic eruption alone, I'm not talking about COVID now, the loss and damage is in excess of $200 million US. We haven't gotten anywhere near $200 million. And I think it is to the credit of all of the hardworking people in NEMO, in the Ministries of Health, and Ministry of Works, that we have returned to some semblance of normalcy post-volcano, at least in the southern half of the island. And so people sort of think that is a distant event or it was done quickly or easily. But I urge people to take a trip north, and you'll see that the situation in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, the situation north of the Dry River, is still dire.
It's still dire.
And the money is necessary.
Yes. We're going to go to a break. So when we come back, we'll continue to look at economic performance, and I want to then move into that same topic. We're going out on the volcano,
sure,
and the conditions up north, and what's the plan.
Okay.
You're looking at Let's Get Down to Business. My guest is the Honorable Camillo Gonsalves. More when we come back. Welcome back. This is Let's Get Down to Business. My guest is the Minister of Finance, Economic Planning, and Information Technology, the Honorable Camillo Gonsalves. Minister, we were talking about the volcano and the dire impact it has had, north, which is where the red zone was.
Yes.
We're going to get back to that, but on a bit more about economic performance. I was looking at a couple of reports. I was looking at a forecast for Caribbean, Latin America and the Caribbean, forecasted economic growth by World Bank, one of them, IMF,
yes,
and the CDB was looking at the Caribbean. And 2021, I think the IMF was quoting 5.6% growth. World Bank was in that vicinity. CDB was more modest,
yes,
3.8% or something like that. But I want to ask you, looking at those figures, looking at the unique situation that we have in St. Vincent, i.e. the volcano,
yes,
because those figures, I think, are forecasted with COVID in mind, okay? And the bounce back,
Absolutely.
bigger economies opening up, tourists start to come again and so on. But we have the volcano. So are we going to be tracking anywhere near that?
No, absolutely not. Those estimates, as you said, were pre-volcano estimates, but they also had, in retrospect, fairly optimistic projections about how much COVID would be under control.
Correct.
And if you read the details of those IMF projections, they were saying, well, by then, most people will be
They're
vaccinated.
all contingent on
yes. So COVID has had a deeper and more lasting impact. So across the board, I expect those IMF numbers to be lower. But we have had this special circumstance of the volcano, and they didn't factor that in at all. And so our preliminary estimates suggest that we're going to have negative growth on the order of about 2%. Things have improved. We have flights returning. There are a few tourists around. There's a little economic activity, particularly from construction, going on in St. Vincent and the Grenadines at the moment. But the severity of the impact of the volcano is such that that has been our long-standing objective. The central bank met in February of this year and said, look, that's in light of COVID, that's no longer feasible. We're going to have to push that deadline back to 2035. We're going to have to push ourselves back by 2030, by 5 years. Now, in addition to that, we have the volcano. And things are constrained globally. So the extent to which you could rely on grant funding, you could go out and ask allies to help you, is not what you would ordinarily have if the challenges were more localized.
Right.
So we are going to have to borrow in the short term. So I think there will be a blip. There will be an upward motion in our debt to GDP ratio, and then we'll level it out over time.
Just as an aside, as you bring in that metric, help me to understand, because I am definitely a Philistine when it comes to some of these things. Bigger countries, bigger economies, like the United Kingdom, like the United States, are carrying extremely high debt to GDP ratios, over 100%.
Well in excess. Japan, for example, well in excess. United States, over 100%.
Right.
Yes.
Why is that not a red flag for them, and it's a red flag for the small economies?
Well, part of it is the sheer size of those economies and the belief that they're sufficiently diverse and sufficiently strong. So part of it is that. But the other part is an underlying stigmatization of Caribbean states, of developing states, of African states, where an arbitrary decision is made that these countries are profligate and they borrow too much money and they spend too much money. And B, we will set a number that we consider to be appropriate. So part of it, economists will try to tell you all sort of hocus pocus to say, well, why 60 and not 65? And why 70?
Part of that stigmatization also, apart from the profit being profligate, isn't part of that the concept that we're also corrupt?
Absolutely. Part of the
We're also helping ourselves.
We spend a lot of money on white elephants, and we don't spend the money wisely. Either we're thieving it or we're spending it recklessly. And it is a stigmatization that feeds a lot of the policy prescriptions that come from Washington, D.C. and other places. Undoubtedly, your debt burden should be manageable. And I have always thought that the better metric would be, how is your debt servicing as a percentage of your GDP? Affecting your ability. Which is the way
you'd want a commercial bank to look at a business.
Absolutely.
Because if I'm running a business, being in $1 million debt or $2 million debt is asking me how long is a piece of string. There needs to be a reference.
Absolutely.
If I am able to service the debt that I'm carrying, then that's the better measurement.
We have, for example, the same debt to GDP ratio as other countries in the region, but our debt is low interest through the sort of World Bank, 1% or when we go to the bond market, it's over a long period of time at a low interest rate. Other countries are borrowing money at commercial rates, high interest rates, short payback period. Their $1 million of debt servicing and my $1 million of debt servicing are very, very different. Because I'm paying pennies and they're paying, serious money. But it's sort of an arbitrary number in that way, but it's still a number that is used as a measuring stick for various reasons.
Be that as it may, we are the whims and fancies of those metrics, because it is by that, as you say, that set policies which affects our ability to borrow, to seek monies to develop our economies. But let's get back to our discussion about the volcano. Let's come back home. North of the Dry River, what is the outlook? What is the government's position in terms of resettling people? Is there any thinking about long-term risk? And maybe we should eliminate some of that right now. Are there places that you've determined are definitely not habitable? It's going to cost too much money to sustain life here. I'm just throwing all of that out to see what your thinking is. What's the government's thinking?
We've been doing a lot of analysis on that issue. First of all, the prospects for danger and how life can be sustained, because also we know that the storms have also been hitting the north of the island disproportionately. So how areas are sustainable, villages, to get to both climate change and volcanic risk. Also the cost that would be incurred relocating villages wholesale. There's some very large settlements north of the river. Sandy Bay is a very large town, for example. And of course, a very scientific analysis has been done. Now, if you go north of the river, you may be surprised by how many houses remained intact. Some were completely devastated, but quite a few were undoubtedly buried under ash, but remained intact. We've gone through that area with NEMO and the University of the West Indies seismic unit and our friends in the French Caribbean, Martinique and Guadeloupe. And they have mapped for us certain lahar zones, certain areas where there's risk of either mud flow, lahar, lava flow, rock falling. And they've marked those on the map and said, we would really recommend that people don't live here.
So you're cordoned those off.
We've cordoned those areas off. None of them reflect entire villages. What they reflect are along banks of certain rivers or certain or further.
But people
afield.
live there, so those
People live there.
So you're going to have to move them.
Right. So we have identified those areas. Now, a lot of those homes were destroyed in the initial eruptions. And we are reconstructing homes elsewhere in St. Vincent, still north, still reasonably close to the affected area, but in areas that we've been assured are not susceptible to
Are these areas still north of the Dry River, or they're south of the Dry River?
Some are north of the Dry River and some are in the lower constituency, immediately south of the Dry River.
Right, Georgetown area.
Yes, so there is a mix.
Yeah.
The homes that we are rebuilding for people, we the government, we are not rebuilding in those areas. We're not rebuilding in north of the river in the danger zones.
Right.
And then we are going to, by using zoning laws and planning laws, restrict reconstruction in those areas. So if you are in one of the Lahar zones and you have a wall or a roof that's damaged, we're going to rebuild your house elsewhere, and then we're going to demolish the house that's there because we don't want somebody else to move into the house. And then using planning and zoning laws, we're going to restrict anybody else from moving. That's going to be about 200 households in the immediate disaster areas. And we're hoping that once we've developed villages elsewhere, those villages will act as a magnet to pull friends and family into the surroundings.
Because I was going to ask you, well, a two-part question. One, the aspect of housing is understood, but the economic activity, which is mainly farming. So we're going to leave, regardless of if a lot of these farming lands are in the cordon off zones or not. Those farming activities, I imagine, can still continue. Yes. You go and you come. People are not going to live there. But are you in this relocation, and you touched a point about using the village that you create as a magnet to get more people. Are you envisaging some sort of new economic thrust when you have this opportunity now to plan how communities are laid out? Because hitherto things really just happen.
Absolutely.
Right? So you have now a plan of how you lay out your community. Are you thinking then of what sort of stimulus you can give and the kind of economic activity you can have?
So farming remains a major driver of economic production north of the river and in St. Vincent and the Grenadines generally. But we are trying, and when you say planned, I don't want people to think that there are some people sitting with an unlimited budget somewhere up in the government house, saying, well, build this and build a park and a school and another business. But we are trying to leverage the existing, which is little more than subsistence, but still wage farming, low scale farming. We're trying to leverage some of that, and we're trying to move other economic drivers in the area. So, for example, we're building a new root processing plant north of the river, and we've shifted that. We've made some new.
Is it going to go back in the spot of where the OA one was, or is it?
It is in the vicinity. You'll have more in the Langley Park area. Right. And we're trying to leverage that. We're trying to create on the tourism front options for tours. The volcano right now is an attraction.
Big one.
And we believe that we should try to leverage, and I've been speaking with major tourism providers, some who are coming here for the first time, but what they can do to get that sort of ecotourism and sort of climb up the volcano and things related to that. People are going to want to come and see this area. There's always disaster tourism. Right. So we're trying to leverage some of that activity as well. And then the day-to-day drivers of activity, the location, for example, of where the Sandy Bay Secondary School should go and how that will pull people in a particular direction who want to live near to the school. The location of where shops will be allowed to go, how that will change economic activity. And the locations in which we build sea defenses, which are ongoing in Georgetown and moving north, which will make people move to areas that are safer and create economic activities in those areas. All of those things are being done with a view of trying to attract people to safer areas without being too heavy-handed with the exception of areas that we know are dangerous areas.
I have one more question, which you can address very quickly before we go to the break. In terms of your relocation of people and the shifting of the economic drivers, over what period of time do you think it will all settle? Because this is not going to happen with the snap of a finger. Rebuilding is going to take 1 year, 2 years, 3 years.
The physical infrastructural reconstruction that's required is a multi-stage thing. The immediate houses that have to be moved, 75 to 100 people who don't have anywhere to live, families, we expect those houses to be built by year end. The other work, the new schools, the changes to roads, the coastal reconstruction, the moving of some economic activity, we think that that is really a 5-year project.
5 years. So you're looking at a 5 year from now, where we're speaking now.
And I think that would be the point at which people could be able to judge and say, the government did a good job in moving people to safety. The government did a good job in the reconstruction, because we're a small country with limited resources. We can't wave a magic wand for resources, and we can't wave a magic wand for construction to make things get built overnight. So it's a process.
Let's go to the break. When we come back, we'll talk about some more economic drivers, this time for the macroeconomy, as it were. You're looking at Let's Get Down to Business. My guest is the Honorable Camillo Gonsalves. More when we come back.
Keep calm. We're online now. Thousands of local content for your viewing pleasure. Live. Boom. IKTV. Tune in. Get interactive. Get involved with WhatsApp or Instagram. Interact live. Party from home. Subscribe, follow, send us your voice notes. Check us out on Instagram, Facebook, WhatsApp, or call us live in studio. Be where the world is going. Stay home and connect online. Boom 1069, IKTV. Join the evolution. It's all about you. Connect now.
This is Let's Get Down to Business. My guest is the Honorable Camillo Gonsalves. Minister, we're going to your economic planning side of things. Sure. We were starting out the program talking about some financial aspects. The whole thing about the way the global economy is shaping up, okay? There are some markets that are recovering from COVID. Yeah. I think, again, in some of my readings, while there's recovery, it's uneven. So you've got some people opening back up, and you got some people who are now beginning to feel the impact, the real bite of COVID. Prior to all of this, you in your 2021 budget, I think, identified some economic growth areas. Fisheries is definitely one of them. And construction is construction that I want to ask you about, because here it is that suddenly you're doing construction that you didn't even plan.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So is this helping?
I can't say that it's helping in the overall sense. It's helping to the extent that there's an economic activity.
Right.
But at the same time, there's some construction that has been delayed or deferred because of particularly the volcano, but to a lesser extent, COVID. We do have a lot of construction going on, though. And I had said, and I still believe, that the economy of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, to the extent that the government has control over it. I'm not talking about the private sector, the business community services sector. The things that we can pull levers to drive. It's essentially a three-legged stool. We have construction, we have agriculture, we have tourism. Tourism was decimated and more than decimated by both COVID and the volcano. Our agricultural belt and our volcano belt, unfortunately, are the same belts. They coincide with one another. So agriculture is taking a serious hit. We plan this year to do a lot of construction on some major projects. A lot of those projects are still ongoing, but had been slowed. Things like the Royal Mill Hotel.
Right.
Things like the Rainforest Seafood, which is about to open now, but was scheduled to open a few months
The
ago.
Holiday Inn Express.
The Holiday Inn Express.
Marriott.
Construction on the Holiday Inn has begun, but it should have been further along. All of these things, the Marriott is yet to begin, and now likely to begin first quarter of next year. So some of the major construction projects were delayed, but not derailed.
Right.
However, there's a lot of construction that's ongoing that was unplanned. At the beginning of the year, when I presented my budget, I said nothing about building a temporary school for the grammar school, a temporary school for the girls' high school, a temporary school for Beckwith Community High, a temporary school for Sandy Bay.
Right.
That's 4 schools.
Right.
Building 4 schools, albeit out of wood,
generating some activity.
Generate some activity. We have a lot of construction work accelerating on coastal defense work. We have a lot of contractors who are busy cleaning roads, rebuilding homes, fixing police stations and hospitals and other infrastructure that was damaged north of the river. So there's a great deal of construction activity. Rainforest Seafood picked up and tried to meet its deadline. Right. Royal Mill is picking up. The Maya's Place Hotel is accelerating.
And then beaches will start shortly.
Beaches will start. I don't know when you're airing this, but it will start within a week of us having this conversation right now.
Right.
So there's a lot of activity on the horizon, or just picking up from the major planned activities. But there was absolutely a surge in unplanned construction that's kept our tradesmen and our contractors very busy, which is a good thing because it's economic activity. The work at the E.T. Joshua shopping center, right, which we see they're building an extension there. The concern when I met with the people from Sandals Beaches last week, the project manager was in town, was given all of these things that are happening, will we beaches have enough tradesmen to build our hotel?
It's a good problem to have
available locally,
because we can import some of our neighboring labor.
Absolutely.
But just to move on, so that's construction. Let's look at, before we get to fisheries, let's look at tourism.
Yeah.
Again, I'm seeing an IMF in the same economic outlook report that they were giving them. I'm seeing a recommendation where they're suggesting that now is a time, given the impact of COVID, as we rebuild tourism, now is a time to look at eco-sustainable tourism, which deals with less mass,
sure,
higher net worth people,
yes,
and more local supplies.
Yes.
Okay. Isn't that what we should be looking at? Period, COVID or no period, or no COVID?
Absolutely, it is what we should be looking at, but there are a few prerequisites. One of the prerequisites is you still need to have critical mass in room stock, because it's all fine to say we have all of this nature to market and that we want high net worth people, but you still need to have room stock at a particular level. The other thing you need to have is airlift,
right?
Because people still need to get here.
Of course, I don't think anybody could dispute that.
But airlift again is connected
it's
to
volume,
room stock.
volume
Exactly.
associated.
So there are certain minimum requirements if you want to have a vibrant and diverse tourism product that have to be met. Once we get to those levels, I am not a fan. I've never been a supporter of the sort of mass tourism that is extractive and exploitative.
Right.
You have a lot of low-wage workers, but most of the money is made and spent overseas. We have to find these areas where you can create value chains for locals. And the good thing about St. Vincent and the Grenadines coming late to the game in tourism relative to our neighbors is that we can adopt some of their best practices and avoid some of their missteps. I say that while I'm also regularly touting the arrival of an all-inclusive mass market hotel, which sounds like I'm speaking out of both sides of my mouth. But we're trying to reinvigorate something that was already an all-inclusive hotel. B, we believe that we have structured that particular agreement with that hotel in a way that will benefit local value chains more than those sorts of
So it will give it some
traditionally do.
momentum, and it's also an ideal opportunity because that particular outfit is big on marketing, and so it gives an opportunity to market St. Vincent,
Absolutely.
and therefore others can piggyback onto that. I think that's where you're going, right?
Yes, absolutely. And we're hoping, and we've been encouraging local hoteliers, local people in the hospitality space to think about a new model for tourism. Not that you just build a guest house and you sit down and wait for people to come, but you think about how you're going to do the tours and how you're going to exploit is the wrong word there, but take advantage of the resources that we have and the very special attractions we have.
And in the meantime, we still have the Grenadines, which again, I think people would argue offers connected to the blue economy, not the fishing part, but the use of the sea. And the yachting tourism is what I'm talking about.
Absolutely.
Are we going to have any special strategic intervention there to bolster that?
There's also the fortuitousness of the fact that we did, in not locking down, a lot of yacht tourism found its way into St. Vincent and the Grenadines during the COVID period because they couldn't have access to other yachting havens in the Caribbean.
Right.
And we have taken very careful note of the things that they consider to be good and bad in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Obviously, the waters, the scenery, all of that, I don't have to speak about that, is top class. We have challenges with security,
right?
That we have initiatives to deal with. We have challenges in the ways, the ease in which yachties can enter and leave St. Vincent and the Grenadines legally, and we're working on that. Some of that involves work with the customs, work with the ports. Some of it involves work with the Coast Guard to improve security and to educate yachties about where they should and should not be. All of that is part of a very near-term tourism plan to focus on yachting tourism. It's something we wanted to do in COVID. Our numbers are up. Part of that, up relatively. Part of that is because other places locked down, but part of it is because we've been making a very special effort to bring yachting tourism to St. Vincent and the Grenadines.
Fisheries.
Yes.
Again, when the Prime Minister speaks, when the Minister of Agriculture speaks, when you speak, I hear about the vast resources we have in terms of our sea boundaries,
yes,
and how rich they are in particular pelagic species and how we can exploit those. Clearly, it calls for some level of investment and the right sort of technology and all that sort of thing. Tell me how we moving in making hay from that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Part of it is, as you said, the type of investment that's required. We're engaged in partnerships with the private sector on a lot of that. So you see this rainforest seafood plant being built in Calaqua, which is a facility that hopes to be able to process over 500,000 pounds of seafood early in its life and up to 1 million pounds as it gets more mature. That amount of production in the seafood space by that one facility alone will double the seafood exports in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. So infrastructurally, we're having, and in terms of demand, we're having a new player on the block that is going to drive a lot of development in the fishery sector. We're working to help fisher folk on a number of fronts. First, we're trying to help them with boats.
Right.
We're trying to help them with the tools that they need.
New technology.
Technologies. We're trying to help them build their own capacity in terms of giving them supplies to build their own lobster pots and all of these things. Not to replace money they would have already spent on lobster pots, but to build more, to get more lobster pots. But also we're trying very hard on a cultural shift.
Right.
Because the mindset of many fisher folk in St. Vincent and the Grenadines is you head out in the morning, you catch enough fish to buy your gas to head out the next day and catch the people as they head home from work at 4 o'clock.
Right.
But elsewhere in the Caribbean, fisher folk stay out for days. Yeah. Now, to stay out for days, you need better equipment, you need better freezing facilities, you need better boats, but you also need a shift in culture to know that if you stay out, it's better than buying gas to come in and out every morning.
And you wouldn't spend any money every day.
Exactly. So there are infrastructural things being done, but there are also cultural shifts taking place. But because we are long geographically, because of this tail of the Grenadines that extends beyond St. Vincent, we have a lot of waters.
Right.
We have a lot of fish, and we have a history of fishing in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And we believe that this is an area that is, I mean, if you look at the graph of fishing of the last 5 years under Minister Caesar, it's been going through the roof, but we think that is going to rise exponentially now.
This is probably a question for Minister Caesar, but I'm sure you're able to answer it as well. Are you happy that we understand the resource, as in efficiency food, the sheer volume that we have, the replenishment rates? Are we on top of that? Are we going to be able to do this thing sustainably?
Yes.
While increasing the volumes in what we land? Are you happy about that?
When we began this conversation about fisheries and growth in the sector, and I was speaking to Minister Caesar, I had the hat at the time of sustainable development. And it was of great concern to me that we properly study the carrying capacity of our waters and whether or not we could deliver the type of fish that this private sector entity wanted and that we hope to deliver to hotels that are coming in the area and to exports and the rest of it.
And also the local person can still afford a pound of fish.
Also that mom and pop can buy some fish
or lobster,
on their way home from work. In terms of the carrying capacity, and we had the University of the West Indies and we had other scientists study this, we don't have a problem in terms of our finfish, our lobster, the majority of our shellfish. The one area that will have to be watched is conch.
Right.
We have sufficiency of conch at the moment, but conch are strange animals. They sort of mate. You have to have a certain number of conch per acre on the floor because they sort of muddle around on the floor until they run into a partner and mate. And if you don't have a sufficient amount of conch in every sort of acre of seabed,
the mating instinct does not kick in.
Well, it could kick in, but you can't find a partner. So the conch we're doing further studies on. We're not in any immediate danger with conch, but the projections that we've done for all other fish say that there's absolutely no challenge in the near, medium, or long term in terms of how much our waters produce. If you look, for example, at lobster, most people lobster fish in the same locations in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And there are other places where they simply don't touch, not because there's not lobster, but because traditionally this is close to home and they've produced enough lobster here. We think that, again, culturally, we can encourage people to fish in new locations, but we also think that the waters can produce enough. Conch would be the one caveat that I have there, and that's something we're studying for.
And of course, the policing of it is
Clearly,
going to be
significant,
very important. We're actually at the end of this segment, and we have one more when we come back from the break. And I guess I want to touch some more aspects of economic drivers with you, because with that, we can see how we're going to climb out of this current challenge with COVID and the volcano. This is Let's Get Down to Business. My guest is the Honorable Camillo Gonsalves. We'll be in our final segment when we come back from the break.
Isn't it good to know that no matter where you are, you're covered? Covered by a company owned by Vaccination that understands your unique insurance needs. At Metrocint General Insurance Company, we've invested 50 years of service to guarantee that you have the peace of mind that you deserve. When it comes to motor vehicle, property, employer's liability, business insurance, and much more, we've got you covered. Our professional and friendly staff understands your needs and ensures you understand your options. Metrocint General Insurance Company.
Welcome back. This is Let's Get Down to Business. We are into our final segment, sadly, with the Honorable Camillo Gonsalves, who has given us a lot of enlightenment in terms of the economic policies, responses to the current challenges, and we will continue that discussion. Minister, your responses have been, by nature of the events, a lot of them have been, well, I wouldn't say a lot. Some have had to be knee-jerk, okay? Because they're fires that you just had to put out.
Sure.
Okay? And those we understand. The medium to long term, which is almost like getting back to normalcy, is going to be determined, I believe, by how quickly we're able to get COVID under control.
That's the major issue.
Right. I don't want to make this program about vaccination. And I think I want to leave that to the health officials. But just to say that, and I'm doing this as part of the private sector initiative, the Chamber of Commerce does sponsor this program, and I'm doing this. I'm going to say that the private sector is unequivocally taking the position that we must get people vaccinated.
Absolutely.
Okay, and I think we're going to hear more about that. The government's position. I know you've got amendments to an act where you want to ensure that frontline workers get vaccinated. But what about the general population?
Look, we can't talk about the economy of St. Vincent and the Grenadines or the region without talking about COVID, which means you can't talk about it without talking about vaccines.
Right.
Until we achieve critical mass, and critical mass is what some people call it herd immunity, until we're north of 65% of the population vaccinated, economic life in St. Vincent and the Grenadines will not get back to normal. You're going to have these boom and bust cycles where the thing is you're between waves and there's a little bit of activity and then things slow down again. And you cannot have sustained economic activity if you have the vast majority of the population unvaccinated. That's just a fact. And the longer we remain unvaccinated, the more vulnerable we become over time because new variants come, they're more contagious, they're more fatal, and there's just no way. There's just no way to talk economics right now without talking about COVID and without talking about vaccines.
So it must be difficult for you as an economic planner to be looking at activities that you, or initiatives that you hope would generate the sort of economic activity, and to be sabotaged by a spike in COVID.
Absolutely.
Or a shutdown. We
Absolutely.
haven't gone there yet, but that's not off the books. It's not impossible. So I'm just sort of curious as to whether the government is going to step the tempo up in this, and I don't know how, in terms of getting people vaccinated.
Well, I think the recent spike and unfortunately a few deaths have concentrated some people's minds because the data show that vaccination rates are trending upwards in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, is what the chief medical officer tells me. So some people who were on the fence and what's the big deal and there's no advantage, some of those people are now moving towards vaccination. But if you sort of let things evolve in this laissez-faire way, we may never get to the point we need to get. The government recognizes and has signaled and is having conversations with the labor unions about frontline workers having to be vaccinated, and that other civil servants having to either be vaccinated or tested regularly.
But do you think, and you're talking about people that you employ, you mean in the government, but look into the private sector. I know you can't tell the private sector necessarily what to do, but there are certain private sector entities that they are front line in the same way as nurses are front line.
Absolutely.
And I'm talking about barbers, hairdressers.
Yeah. That's why I look like this at the moment.
Right. So and I don't think you can just leave them to just disappear.
I agree with you. Now, first of all, I think, and I've been calling around to private sector entities, and the discrepancies, the variance in vaccine rates is absolutely astounding. There's some places that are almost at 100%, and others that are in single digits. So the approaches, the necessity for vaccination, the leadership exercised by people is different. The private sector has to also understand that they have legal levers that they can pull here to encourage people to get vaccinated. That is not just the government alone that can mandate or ask people to get vaccinated. The private sector can do many of these things as well, by demanding that people get vaccinated.
And I think in the interest of full disclosure, because I mean, I can't pretend as if I'm not with the Chamber of Commerce, and I would also say, in a bit of in advance a little bit, that there is a private sector initiative formed by some big business leaders. And when I say big, it's only because they are employers of large numbers. It's not as if we're keeping anybody out, right? But we're looking at people who, if their business is to go south, it have a significant impact on the economy. So I'm just saying to my audience that what you're addressing, we can expect to see a response from the private sector along those lines.
And I intend, and I've signaled to some business owners, some of the large employers were not available at the time. I'm trying to get everybody together, not necessarily physically together, but at a common time, so we can have a sort of a mini summit where we share best practices, we share some ideas about what works, what doesn't work, what's legal, what's on the fringes of violations of rights and the like. So we want to have that conversation, but absolutely, the government and the private sector have to tackle this thing together. Additionally, as when the government had specific requirements in terms of masks and occupancies on minivans, which are a private sector entity, we are continuing to look at and continuing to be advised by the chief medical officer about those private sector areas that, as you say, are frontline and have the potential to spread COVID.
And especially within the tourism area.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's a big economic wheel.
And let's remember, Tony, that within a couple of weeks of this conversation airing, we're going to have our first British Airways flight.
Not British Airways.
Sorry, Virgin Atlantic flight.
Yes.
Gosh, it's terrible.
Yes.
First Virgin Atlantic flight. We're going to have the resumption of flights from Canada. We're going to have the resumption of CAL from New York. So St. Vincent and the Grenadines, in terms of airlift and in terms of people coming into the country from areas where COVID has spread wild, is going to be more vulnerable than it's ever been. And the tourism sector, writ large, is going to be on the front line of that. The taxi drivers, the restaurateurs, the bartenders, the DJs, the tour guides, everybody.
Are we prepared for this? Because we're talking next week, or not next week, but sometime very soon.
Within the next few weeks, absolutely.
Next few weeks, I meant, right? We're going to have, I believe in a particular day in the week, they're going to be those same 4 airlines landing on the same day.
Close to the same time.
Are we prepared? Just multiply that by 3 weeks, 4 weeks, because that's going to be cycling. That's a little boom.
Absolutely.
Okay. Can we handle it? COVID-wise, are we prepared? And also, are we prepared staff-wise? Or, there are many factors.
Tremendous logistical planning is taking place. And undoubtedly, there'll be a misstep here and there. But we're planning, for example, even just with the one American Airlines flight we're having now, people say they're waiting too long to get swabbed and tested just to come out of the airport. We're making adjustments to that. For cruise ships, which are beginning to return, where can the passengers go? Can they walk the streets when they come off the boat as normal?
That's the point. We weren't even talking about cruise ships.
Exactly.
As well.
Or do they have to stay in particular bubbles of vaccinated people? We're working on those logistical arrangements with the tourism industry as well, with the cruise industry as well. And Minister James has been going sector by sector to make sure that each sector has a plan and a plan that is feasible, not that just works on paper,
right.
To deal with this influx. Never before will we have as many tourists coming into the island on a single day as we're going to have in a few weeks' time.
Correct.
in spite of COVID and all of these challenges. So it's going to require some ramping up of some activities. We think that we have the plans in place, but we won't know until those plans are tested. And obviously, one or two things may go wrong, but we think we're on top of this issue.
We are in the dying moments of our last segment, and therefore the dying moments of the program. I'm going to ask you something like, in an exam, you get the long questions, and then you get some short ones.
Can I just say B or A or C, or I have
not much choice, but the ones that were 2 marks are not 10.
Sure.
Right? Are you going to be able to pay salaries in January?
Yes, but not sure how much beyond the January. So salaries are safe in the very near term, but if COVID continues and people remain unvaccinated, they will be threatened sometime next year.
That means layoffs, if that's the case?
First, it will mean more debt. Second, it will mean reassign priorities in terms of spending. And third, if needs be, it could mean layoffs. Well,
that's a dire outlook.
Yeah.
And certainly very politically unpopular.
Sure.
But
that's the severity of the situation that we're facing. I mean, layoffs are not imminent by any stretch of the imagination. There are many things that we could do, but each thing that we would do to continue meeting our wage responsibilities will cause sacrifice in some other sector of the society. And these things are all interconnected and they have a knock-on effect. So salaries are safe in the near term, but unless people get vaccinated, unless we can get COVID under control, I can't promise that indefinitely.
So my next short question, is the government going to act in terms of people who do not come over? I'm talking about within the public sector, and the ones that you deem necessary to get vaccinated and do not comply. Do they still have a job?
Well, as we've said with the frontline workers, if you're on the front line and you don't want to get vaccinated, we'll try to move you off the front line. But if there is nowhere to move you to, your job will be in jeopardy because you don't have an absolute right to any job on your own terms. You have to work at the terms that your employer sets. And there will be cases, unfortunately, where people are going to have to make a decision about the repercussions of the choices that they make.
What's the good news?
Oh, there's a lot of good news. St. Vincent and the Grenadines first of all, has the most ambitious plan in the region for increasing its hotel room stock. We believe that the tourism economy in St. Vincent and the Grenadines is massively untapped and is poised for serious growth. And we could start tossing around the brand names, but we all know them and right. Time is short. So tourism is growing. We think that the potential of the blue economy is absolutely breathtaking. And that is something that's going to take off and generate its own momentum. And we think that the government has a number of plans in place for serious infrastructural work and construction work that will also generate activity. We haven't spoken about the port, brand new port in Kingstown. We haven't spoken about some of the other sustainable development plans that we have that involve massive injections of resources. We haven't spoken much, only in passing, about the hospital, the changes in healthcare. So we think that the challenges we're facing here are severe, but they're a blip.
And hopefully very short term.
Very well, Soufriere tends not to erupt every Monday morning. So we're hoping that we have a lull there. We are hoping, as always, that climate change and the effects of hurricanes don't strike us again severely. But we have this young, vibrant, entrepreneurial population that is looking for opportunities, even in the midst of all of these challenges. Yes. And they're finding ways to help St. Vincent and the Grenadines grow. And as long as we bet on those people, the news will always be good, even though you have a few blips along the way. So we think that there are a number of plans in place beyond this COVID pandemic, beyond the immediate aftermath of the volcano, that tap the potential of Vincentians and tap the potential of St. Vincent and the Grenadines as a country, that really position us to do well. There's been a lot of foundational work done to get St. Vincent up to this point for developmental acceleration and transformation. And yes, this has been a blip and it's been a setback, but those fundamentals are still in place. And we're excited about where we can go.
Minister Gonsalves, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure spending this hour with you. And I'm certainly going to have you back to talk a bit more about that book that you wrote.
Anytime.
We need to discuss that.
Anytime.
This has been another edition of Let's Get Down to Business. My guest was the Honorable Camillo Gonsalves, Minister of Finance, Economic Planning, and Information Technology. Do join us the next time Let's Get Down to Business airs.